So you've done all the research and all the planning, and you've picked out the best living books for your students' education. But now what? How do you go about executing a Charlotte Mason lesson? I'm going to share with you some steps to a simple Charlotte Mason lesson. So hi, my name is America. Welcome to A Heart for Home Education. I am a homeschooling mother to 3, and I have been doing the Charlotte Mason style of education since beginning school with my now 3rd grade student. And the steps to the lessons that I'm going to be sharing with you today are what I think are the pillars of a Charlotte Mason lesson. All throughout my homeschooling journey, I have been learning and growing and changing and tweaking things to make Charlotte Mason's principles work in a realistic and sustainable way in our homeschool. So the method to these lessons that I'm about to share with you will work for most of the literature-based lessons for a Charlotte Mason education. So for us, that includes Bible, history, geography, some science, fairy tales, fables, folk tales, Christian studies, and so much more. If it involves a book in a Charlotte Mason education, then you can probably follow this format for a lesson. Some of the areas where we don't follow this format would be arithmetic and any of the language arts subjects like phonics, teaching your children how to read. I just follow the lessons provided in those books usually. So I just wanted to share my heart a little bit on why I am sharing this video on a simple Mason lesson. Not because we can't handle the full ideas that Mason has given us, but because sometimes we are juggling so many other things that we need something that is realistic and sustainable. And I'm all about helping myself and other mothers make Charlotte Mason come with us in our day-to-day lives and not feel like this unattainable ideal. So I don't want to dumb down Charlotte Mason's principles for us as mother teachers, because we are capable of a lot. We are capable of implementing an intricate lesson, but we also aren't just teachers. We are mothering often littler kids, older kids. We are mothering babies. We aren't sleeping through the night. We are also our own cooks and maids and chauffeurs and wives. So we don't have this life that Charlotte Mason sometimes wrote about, because she was an educator and she was speaking as an educator. She spoke to mothers as well, but mothers in that era often had maids and cooks and nannies and helps. So I don't want to oversimplify what Mason would have intended us to do in our lessons. However, I do want to encourage myself and other fellow mother teachers in similar seasons of life that we can approach these lessons in a realistic and sustainable and enjoyable and life-giving way. Our students can read these really good books, take these living ideas and take them in as their own, and then go on to create this relationship with these ideas through narration and notebooking. With all that said, I want to jump in and show you some of the pillars of what I think a Charlotte Mason lesson include. So the first step of a Charlotte Mason lesson is to remind students what they have already learned about this topic. So it is a quick recap, a quick reminder of what we read last time, just telling your students, last time we read this book, this happened to this character. Or if it's a history book, last time we read this book, we were talking about nomads roaming and then settling down and farming for their own food. Just a 1-second highlight of what we talked about in the last story. This gives your children a thread to kind of grab onto, to remember, oh yeah, this is the book talking about nomads. This is my history book. And a simple statement reminding them what we read last time pulls them in and gets them back and re-engaged into the story. So I generally just do the recap on the fly. I can look at the book, skim what we just read, and jog my children's memory just like that. Children are so good at remembering the stories that we've read. Even if we are reading 6 to 10 books throughout the week, my children can recall what happened the last time we read almost better than I can. They keep track of these stories. These are really engaging, good stories. If we've done the work of choosing the best books, then our children are going to be engaged and they're going to remember, and the story is going to be important to them. And so most of the time I find that my children remember what happened in the last lesson better than I do. Charlotte Mason talked a lot about pre-reading your child's resources and also having a captain idea. I sometimes use these things. I sometimes will pre-read. However, I just don't have the time to always pre-read. We read so many books that I'm not going to sit down and read Jungle Book by myself before having to read it to my students in the next month or two. It's just not realistic. It's not sustainable. So for me, this is one of the ways that I've differed from Charlotte Mason. I've kind of veered into a more practical and simple approach, that I know that the books that we're choosing are coming from reputable sources. And so I'm not really worried about the content that's in them. I trust that it is going to be okay and we'll be able to deal with any of the content that may come. This next step I'm going to share, you can do ahead of time or you can do it in the moment. And that would be to glance over the next chapter or the next chunk of reading and find anywhere where you may need to reference a map or a dictionary. So I keep this next to us during our readings. If we're in the schoolroom, this is what I will use, is this tiny little globe. They have little inflatable globes at the dollar store you could use. I have maps on the walls as well, and those are usually corresponding to whatever story we are reading. This map next to me is a world map, but I also have a more in-depth US map. And for our missionary story right now, I have a map of the continent of Africa printed out, as well as some Egyptian maps printed. I don't look ahead for every single reading because, for example, our missionary story takes place in Egypt. And so I know that the story will be in Egypt and I'd like to have an Egypt map handy, but I'm not going to pre-read to look at all of the towns and cities that are mentioned. The other thing that you can do to prepare is to look for any words that your child may not know or may not have a mental picture of. Kids can use context clues to figure out what a word means. And I usually try to let them try to figure out what it means. If my children cannot pick up on the context clues, then they themselves will stop the reading to ask me what a word means. And I'm okay with defining it in the middle of the reading if that's the case. We have a dictionary sitting by us for readings to look it up. But I don't want to rob them of that experience of defining every single word beforehand so that they know it, and rob them of the experience of using their context clues to figure out what the word means. Mason was very clear that paraphrasing and dumbing down texts depreciates the value of children. We kind of pester them with our own thoughts about the text. We interject our thoughts. Mason says that we are convinced that the children cannot figure out this vocabulary on their own, and so we talk on and on about what it means to our own heart's content, but not to theirs. It's not what they need. So the main purpose of having the map and the dictionary and any words defined before you start your reading is so that you aren't stopping the flow of the reading to interject all of these thoughts. And I'm not interrupting the story right in the middle to say, okay, let's stop and find this country on the map. And the same thing with a lot of those words and terms. Now, the next step is to read the story. Read the book, read the chapter, read the passage. So I try not to stop and interrupt the readings at all. I don't stop and interject my own thoughts. I don't stop and ask for predictions. I don't stop and ask them for connections or anything like that. I just read the text as it is written. To the best of my ability, to the best of my children's attention, we are just going to read that story and let the story do its work. But I just usually read a chapter or a section, whatever is still holding my students' attention and is a complete work that can be narrated. The only exception to that is if a comment is made in the book that is hateful or racist. I will stop reading and I will address it right then. And there are a lot of examples of Ma Ingalls saying something that is racist, particularly toward Native Americans. I don't want them to sit with those ideas for too long, so I will stop the reading and we will talk about how it was not kind of Ma to say that, how it was wrong then and it's wrong now. And then after that, we will just move through the reading. So those are really the only exceptions to why I would stop a reading, is if my child has a question or if something hateful or racist comes up. Most of the books that I've chosen are excellent resources and are reputable resources that the kind of great conversation recognizes as a solid, reputable resource. And so I can trust that any bad choices that the characters have made at the end will be worked out and that the experience will be used for the character's good. Ultimately, I don't want to draw my children away from the story. I want to invite them into the story further and let the story do its work. Now, the next step is to ask for narrations. Depending on the age of your children, you might be stopping to ask for narrations more frequently. I find that just a couple of paragraphs, maybe the length of a fable, is good for beginning narrators. You need to give them enough to narrate, but not too much that they're overwhelmed with the content that they have to narrate. So about 1 to 2 narrations per day, I will write down my children's narrations, and I will just write down what they say with grammar errors, everything in it. If they left out sort of a principal part of a sentence, then I will put it in brackets what they actually meant. But other than that, I just tried to write it as is. And then other than those 1 or 2 narrations, I just take their narrations orally, and that's it. I always start with the youngest student and then move to the older student, and I ask the older student what they can add to the younger student's narration. My most commonly used narration prompt is, tell me what happened in that chapter. Tell me what happened in that reading. Tell me what happened in the story today. Those are the kind of open-ended narration prompts that I usually get started with. I really try to avoid asking them questions that evoke just a very simple answer. I want the questions that I ask, if needed, to really egg them on to give a deep and thoughtful narration. So I try not to get in their way with excessive prompting or quizzing or yes or no questions. I just try to give them that one open-ended prompt and then see how their narrations unfold naturally. Once they've narrated, if it is extra short, then I will ask some more open-ended questions to kind of move them towards a stronger narration. So most of the time that would look like for me to say something like, say more about whatever the topic is. So for our history book, say more about why the nomads decided to start farming. That is not just a yes or no question. It causes them to think. It causes them to put into words more from the story. I'm not asking them to analyze or to give their thoughts or opinions on things, just an open-ended prompt about the story. This is a skill that you will be working on for 12 years with your child, so their narrations may not look like what you thought they would. They might only be a couple of sentences, and that's okay. The whole point of narration is so that the story becomes a part of them. They are taking the story in, they are making their own connections and developing the own storyline in their brains, and then communicating back what the story was. This is a very hard skill. If you've ever tried it as an adult, it is very difficult to read a passage and then tell back what was in the passage. Narration covers so many areas of study that are normally found in a typical language arts program, such as oral skills, sequencing events. Oftentimes students will just naturally pick up on things like settings and characters and plot. They will just produce these on their own through narration. Narration is a pillar of a Charlotte Mason education. I could do a whole video on narration. I could talk about narration for so long, but those are the basics of narration and what we're looking for after reading a text with our students. The final step in a Charlotte Mason lesson would be to notebook. I do not have my kids' notebook after every single reading. That would take so much time. Similarly to how I just write down one oral narration per day, they also just will draw one picture per day. Sometimes they feel like drawing a lot more pictures. Sometimes I have to coax them to just do the one picture, but making it their own so that when they look back through their notebook, they see that picture, it jogs their memory, they've made another connection to the story, and they can recall what happened in the story. And it's just another layer in that story becoming important to them and part of them. Notebooking for us is a very open-ended task. They just need to notebook something that pertains to the story. It can be whatever detail they wanted. It can be a sketch of the setting, a sketch of the character, or an item that the character interacted with. Anything that will help them jog their memory and remind them of what this story was about is acceptable for their notebook entry. In philosophy of education, Mason stresses that learning is to be the child's responsibility, and it is his job, and he should feel the freedom to take in this knowledge and to make it a part of himself and make use of it as he sees fit. The students should be aware of their responsibility in their own learning, and they should know that it is their job to know what has been taught. And so the ideas of narration and notebooking are born from that idea, because children are taking in the knowledge, they are deciding what is important about the material to them, and then they are repeating it back and making it their own and sharing what they felt was most important to be known from that passage. And because these are quality books that we're reading, it doesn't matter to us what bits and pieces they are pulling. It's all important and it's all beautiful and it's all part of shaping us as humans. So narration and notebooking, they may seem like not enough to assess whether your child knows, because traditionally we are used to a curriculum that has worksheets, that assesses, that asks these questions, and if our students can parrot back the answers, then we know that they have mastered the material. But Mason approaches knowledge in such a different way, and she encourages us to get out of our children's way and to have our child take authority over himself, to make his own self attend to what is being read, to make his own self take it in and learn and make it a part of himself. It's a very satisfying endeavor for children. And so it may seem scary to move away from worksheets, but it is really letting the child be free to take this knowledge in as their own and giving them the freedom to do so. So that is my process for putting together a Charlotte Mason lesson. This applies to all of the books that we read in our homeschool, and it provides very engaging and rich lessons for the lower elementary, lower forms of a Charlotte Mason homeschool. If you want to see the living books that we are reading this year, then after this video, watch my DIY classical Mason curriculum picks for this year. Please comment down below what your favorite living book is that you're reading with your kids. For us right now, that is The Jungle Book, and we've had a lot of good narrations from that. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.